Legend tells of a tomb deep in the mountains where a frost giant king lays buried, frozen inside with his long dead subjects, and a priceless crystal that holds hundreds of souls. If your players can brave the cold and trap-filled dungeons, then they can claim the long-lost loot as their own. Or will the king have something to say about it? Welcome to Quick Quest, where I give you ready-to-run adventures you can use in your own games. This quest was originally designed for 6 level 8 adventurers, but can easily be tuned up or down depending on the strengths and number of your players. I ran this quest at my own table, and after a couple of tweaks, I am very excited to share it with you. Without further ado, let's get started. This quest takes place deep in a frozen mountain range, where ice and snow make travel nearly impossible, and the unprepared will quickly end up frozen solid. Legends tell of a frost giant king who, as his body grew frail and his mind began to fade, ordered his soldiers to slay his own subjects so he might rule over them even in death. He had his trusted mage trap their souls in a gem and placed it atop his crown with his final dying breath. Buried with his crown and riches, his tomb now waits for anyone daring enough to brave the elements and steal his gold, and a crystal of souls that would be priceless to the right buyer. Your players could hear about this legend in a lot of different ways. Maybe they received a map to the tomb as a reward for a previous quest that they did. Or perhaps they heard of it while drinking at a tavern in the mountain foothills, a drunken tall tale with a grain of truth to it. I had my players seek it out as part of a bargain with a demon, fetch them the gem inside, and they could have the soul of their fallen ally that the fiend had captured. No matter how they learn of the tomb, the riches inside, as well as the priceless gem of souls, should be enough to entice them into doing the little dungeon delving. And if that's the case, then you have a quest on your hands. As for actually getting to the tomb, trekking the frozen mountains is a pretty daunting challenge. How much of a challenge is up to you. If they have a map or know the path there, then it may be as simple as having them roll a couple survival checks as they make their way up and down the mountains, trying to stay on track. If their path forward isn't quite as clear-cut, you may consider making it into a skills challenge, having the party take turns describing how they want to help the group proceed, then having them roll to see how well they do. With enough successes, they can eventually get through the mountains and find their way to the tomb. You can also have their path be a bit more curated if you want. When I ran it, I had the path to the tomb described to them by a mountaineer who'd spent a lifetime in the peaks and wrote out a couple different encounters for them to find along the way. The players faced off with trolls, negotiated with a hag, dodged an avalanche, and even returned a baby yeti to its family, all before ever reaching the frozen burial ground. You certainly don't have to put that much effort into the journey there, but getting to the tomb can be an adventure all on its own. However they get there, your players will eventually reach a set of frozen stairs carved into the face of a mountain, and ascending the ancient steps will bring them to a cavern opening. The walls of the cave are completely frozen, and about 30 feet in, they'll see 2 massive doors made of white stone sealed shut. If they look closely at the walls, they'll notice there are figures encased in the ice, the bodies of long-dead frost giants, left in ice as a monument to their king. The moment one of your players step inside, they'll feel a wind begin to pick up from inside the cave, blowing outward. The howl will fill their ears, and everyone inside the cave or just outside will need to make a DC 12 Wisdom saving throw. On a failure, they'll be filled with fear and flee the cavern, back out onto the slippery steps. They'll need to succeed on a DC 12 Dexterity saving throw to not slip and stumble down the stairs, taking some bludgeoning damage and a bit of a blow to their ego. After your party has collected themselves, they'll notice that there's a bronze bell embedded about 15 feet up in each door. Scrolled above both are words in Giant, and if anyone in your party can translate, they'll understand them to say, "Toll the dead." Besides being a reference to the spell, this means that they'll need to ring the 2 bells in unison, no matter how that is. Simultaneous spells, arrow shots, or a really big jump and swing with an axe will do it. Once the bells have been rung, the 2 doors will open, and your players can head inside the tomb. Beyond the doors lies a huge entry chamber. The ceiling rises up 40 feet, a suitable height for giants, and the walls look as frozen as the exterior. The floor is tiled with blue and white stone, creating swirling patterns like falling snow. In each corner sits a huge statue of a kneeling giant, and each is reaching out one arm to extend an axe, with the 4 blades meeting in the center. Directly below where the axes touch, set in the floor is a large crystal. Across from where they entered, the wall displays a mural of a frost giant king holding an axe above their head, while their subjects bow down before them. This wall holds the entrance to the tomb's inner sanctum, But to unlock it, your players will first have to get past the dungeon's defenses. To their right and left are 4 halls, 2 per side, and each leads to traps and obstacles that your players will have to get past in order to unlock the way forward. I'll go through each one by one, but your party will be free to tackle the dungeon in whatever order they see fit. First up, a dungeon classic. Following the first pass, they'll find the entire hall is shrouded in magical darkness. Those with higher passive perception will be able to hear something moving within, and in that dark are 3 swinging axes, each ready to deal 3d6 slashing damage if your players aren't careful. If they want to try their luck to dodge through, it'll take a DC 13 dexterity saving throw per axe, and if they can't see, they'll have disadvantage. But if your players try to get rid of the darkness first, you can treat it just like the second level spell, so a dispel magic from one of your players will do just fine. Once past the magical darkness, they'll reach an iron door with several symbols carved into it. They'll represent a snake, a wolf, a boar, a bear, and a dragon. In Giant, there will be words above the symbols that read, "Attack the ancient enemy." In D&D lore, dragons and giants are sworn rivals, and your players may be able to pick up on this fact with a successful history check. They'll need to hit the proper symbol with the melee weapon in order to open the door, and if they smack the wrong one, they'll take 3d6 psychic damage. A close inspection from one of your players, maybe with perception or investigation, could reveal markings on the dragon symbol that could also clue them into which one to hit. Past the door, the tunnel opens up into a chamber. Set into the walls are large coffins, big enough to hold giant remains. 2 axes are carved into the floor, and each is inlaid with sapphires. This is where the other members of the royal family and their advisors were buried, and across the way, there is a black iron brazier that sits unlit. Your players will need to light the brazier in order to proceed, and for that, they may notice that in each of the corners of the ceiling, about 30 feet up, there is a small red crystal. Breaking all 4 crystals, either through magic or weapons, will cause the brazier to burst into flames. A simple puzzle, but all of those coffins might entice your players too. To remove the lid of a coffin takes a DC 18 athletics check, but the moment the lid starts to move, a gray swirling dust will kick up out of the sarcophagus and swirl around the player or players that opened it, prompting a DC 15 Constitution saving throw. If they fail, they'll come down with sight rot, a disease that causes blood to trickle out of their eyes like tears and gives them a penalty to attacks and ability checks where they need their vision. Usually, the disease takes a day to kick in, but since they're delving through a dungeon right now, I'd ignore that part and have it take effect immediately. I'll leave their reward for grave robbing up to you, but some giant-sized jewelry or a common magic item isn't a bad idea. Just make sure they aren't bleeding out of their eyes for nothing. That would be a bit of a jerk move. Once they return to the central chamber, they'll find that for each brazier that they light, one of the axes held aloft by the giant statues in the room will begin to glow. 4 axes, 4 pass, 4 braziers. While the first pass was shrouded in darkness, the next one is open and appears to not be trapped at all. But concerningly, your players will notice large holes that have been dug into the walls and floors in places, and if they choose to investigate, they'll notice small areas where the stone itself has even melted. Everything in this tomb isn't dead, it seems. As they start to walk down the pass, they'll hear what sounds like scraping on rock, until 3 creatures come bursting out of their burrows along the pass. These are young remorazes, which look like hooded centipedes of fire and ice. The creatures are immune to cold damage, and their warm bodies will be a big problem for any of your melee fighters, as boiling blood will splash back on them with every strike. And in the close quarters of the hallway, they'll pose a challenge for your party without being too overwhelming. And if your party proves to be more than a match for the monstrosities, they'll more than likely flee back into their dens rather than fight to the death. At the end of the hall, they'll come across their second iron door. This one also has a message in Giant, which if they can translate, reads, "Respect your king." Above the words, an arcane rune in the door will begin to glow as the players approach. After a couple seconds, will blast freezing cold shards of ice down the hall. If your players are caught in the frozen storm, they'll have to make a DC 15 Constitution save or take 3d8 cold damage, half on a success. The puzzle is simple. They'll need to kneel before the rune to advance, avoiding the icy blast above and causing the door to open. Beyond is a small chamber that's lined on either side with pedestals. On each sits a glittering gem, and they're each a different color. In total, there are 8. Brown, sky blue, yellow, gray, red, black, white, and navy blue. 4 on each side. Across from the entrance, lined up against the wall, are 6 statues of kneeling giants. Though they look identical, they each differ a bit in height, with the shortest on the left and the tallest on the right. Each statue holds its hands out in front of it as though waiting for something to be placed inside. In D&D lore, giants are placed into a hierarchy called the Ordning, which ranks them in strengths. The order goes hill giants as the weakest, then stone, frost, fire, cloud, and finally storm giants to round out the list. For this puzzle, each gem relates to one of those giants, and your players will need to sort them in order from weakest to strongest to proceed. Your players could make history checks to see if they know anything about giant history and culture, and even if they don't, they might inspect the statues even closer for more clues. Through investigation or perception, they might notice small flame designs in the beard of the third giant, or lightning bolts in the eyes of the storm giant statue. Just to lay it all out, the order goes as follows. The brown gem goes with the hill giant, the gray gem goes second with the stone giant, the white gem is third with the frost giant, the fourth is the red gem with the fire giant, fifth is the sky blue gem with the cloud giant, and last is the navy blue gem with the storm giant. You might notice that yellow and black don't match up. They're just there to trip up your party. If they put the wrong gem in the hands of the wrong giant, it'll explode, causing them to make a DC 15 dexterity save or take 3d6 damage of whatever type matches that gem, and then it will reform on its pedestal. But once they succeed in placing all of the gems correctly, they'll watch as the wall behind the pedestals opens, revealing an iron brazier that lights up with fire. 2 down, 2 to go. The third pass won't look like much at first, but after a couple steps in, your players will begin to fall through the floor, which is really just an illusion for the next 30 feet or so. To avoid tumbling into an acid pit 20 feet below and taking 2d8 damage every round, they'll need to succeed on a DC 17 dexterity save or make a DC 13 investigation or perception check first to spot that the floor isn't real. Once they notice the illusion or fall in, they can get around the acid by flying over, teleporting, running along the wall, whatever methods they have at their disposal. On the door, they'll find a handprint that's embedded in the iron, with a phrase above that reads, "Blood of the people in giant." If anyone with giant lineage puts their hand on the door, namely a Goliath, then the door will open automatically. If anyone else touches it, though, they'll take 3d6 necrotic damage as the door siphons some of the blood out of their body. But either way, the door will open, and your party can proceed inside. Beyond the doorway, your players will find a room full of treasure. Troughs of gold coins, shelves littered with rubies and sapphires, trinkets and trophies galore. In the back of the room, the iron brazier they're looking for just sits out in the open. There's even a torch next to it for easy lighting. There's no puzzle in this room. If your players want, they can walk right across, set the fire, and be on their way. But if they get greedy and touch any of the gold, crystals, or artifacts in the room, that's when things get tricky. As soon as any of the treasure is touched, 3 Aleps, undead horrors that whisper in the minds of the players, will spawn from the mounds of gold. If you only have the monster manual, you can just use race instead. Once they've dispatched the undead protectors, it's up to you to decide if the gold and jewels are real or just a trap to kill money-hungry adventurers. If you do give them the money, just make sure you're comfortable with the party going up a tax bracket. Paying for rooms in an inn won't exactly be a problem anymore. For the final path, your players will find that the hall's ceiling is covered in hanging icicles. The moment anything moves underneath, they'll crash down to the floor, regrowing up above afterwards. To simply dash across would take an athletics check, but your players can try dodging, teleporting, or whatever else they can think of. I'd set the DC at 15 for their attempts, and have them take 3d6 piercing damage every time they fail. Once past the icicles, they'll find, you guessed it, one final doorway. This one will have a round metal plate attached to the front and the words, "Prove your strength," written in giant above. To open the door is simple. One of your players will need to smash the gong with a weapon or a fist strong enough to advance. It'll be a DC 18 athletics check to hit it hard enough, and on a failure, they'll rebound off the plate and take 48 force damage. If multiple players want to try hitting it at the same time, you can always have one take the help action to give the other advantage. Unfortunately, for any players that use strength as their dump stat, the challenge continues beyond the door. In the next chamber, the party will find 3 thick iron chains hanging from the ceiling. Murals along the walls depict frost giants performing all sorts of feats of strength. Wrestling, lifting boulders, giant stuff. The iron brazier sits toward the back of the room, but no fire or torch will cause it to light up. In order to set it ablaze, your players will need to pull on the chains. This is a combined athletics check Together, they'll need to roll a 45 in order to proceed, adding up all of their different checks. Multiple people can pull on a single chain, which you can show by granting one of them advantage on their roll. And even if your spellcasters aren't the lifting type, this is a great place for them to use spells like guidance and enhance ability to assist. Once the party has pulled hard enough, the brazier will light up, and your players can move on to the final challenge. Returning to the central chamber, your players will find that all 4 of the axes are now lit up, and a beam of light shoots down onto the crystal imbued in the floor. Where the mural of the Frost Giant King once was, a 5th pass has now opened, and following it, your players will reach the monarch's final resting place. 5 coffins sit in the room, and at its center, the frozen, desiccated body of the Frost Giant King sits upon a throne of stone and bone. It wears a crown of antlers, and placed into the front of the helm is the glittering soul gem your party is after. But as they approach, the ancient king will begin to move, standing once more and picking up their massive axe. And that's not all. The lids of the coffins around the room will start to shift, and crawling out are 5 undead polar bears, ready to serve their master. It's time to roll initiative. Between the polar bears and the frost giant, this should be a challenging fight for your party. There is a frost giant zombie stat block in the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount that you can use to make it even tougher, but I don't have that book, so I didn't use it. If you have my luck, though, your players might absolutely steamroll the base Frost Giant stats, so consider giving it a few legendary actions to help it get off more damage and move around the battlefield, and layer actions like ice spikes that shoot up out of the floor, or areas where your players have to avoid in order to not be frozen in place. After a hopefully tense battle, your players will slay the giant and retrieve the soul gem, ending this quick quest. With the king returned to rest and the gem in their possession, your players are free to leave the frozen tomb behind and hopefully find somewhere a little warmer. That's it for this quick quest. I hope you got some inspiration that you can use in your own games. If you do end up running this quest, or have suggestions for how it can be improved, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate if you'd leave a like and consider subscribing to the Bard's College. I make quick quests like these, as well as content about DMing, monsters, and all sorts of stuff. But for now, good luck, and remember, crit your players.